Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Bottom Line. I'm CJ Wilson, joined by Josh Olszewicz, and we have a special, mysterious guest today. A lot of people don't know how Bitcoin gets developed. They don't know what a core dev is. They don't know how any of this stuff happens. So today we have Gloria, who's joining us from a mystery undisclosed location, and she is going to break down a lot of the behind-the-scenes action of what's the life of a core dev, how does it work, how do we improve Bitcoin, and how does Bitcoin compare to other methods of sending money across the internet. So, Gloria, thank you. Thank you for coming on today.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hopefully I can do the topic justice a little bit.
So, Josh put some really good pre-show notes together for us. And I think, just jumping right into it, how much better is the user interface and user experience for anybody using Bitcoin than it was a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I haven't been in Bitcoin for that long, but even to me, I feel like it's really good. It's amazing. Like, I have a Raspberry Pi node that runs Umbrel, and when I got it, I had looked at Bitcoin Core, and by the way, was very surprised by how easy it was to build on Bitcoin Core. But also, like, it worked straight out of the box, where it's just like plug in the Ethernet cable, press the power button, and you have a working Bitcoin node running on Tor, and like it's incredibly easy to, I guess, be your own bank and be self-sovereign, as they say. Yeah, I think it's like stupidly easy to be a Bitcoiner nowadays.
So
Yeah, hopefully that helps.
what got you into Bitcoin in the beginning? Like, where did you come from? What was your path to Bitcoin discovery, I guess, in that regard?
Yeah, I went to college studying computer science, so that kind of put me in the right direction to find Bitcoin. And I actually applied to the chain code residency, kind of thinking that would be like a summer internship kind of thing, which is not true. But it was like one of many kind of academically interesting technical challenges. This idea of like distributed systems and cryptography. And, if you want to design a system where theoretically the most secure system is where the only assumptions that you need to have are people are economically rational. So like, oh, it's not if people cheat, then you have a government like infrastructure for people to like get their money back, or like, oh, you need to have just like a social system that works, stuff like that. Like just all these interesting, I think we called it like crypto economics, or like mechanism design, where you're like trying to create a system like that incorporates economics and computer science, where you've like kind of set the parameters and like actors will act rationally and you'll have a nice system that's fair. This is kind of abstract, but like, there are a lot of like ideologies in there from the beginning that I found very appealing. And on top of that, there's a lot of very interesting engineering technical challenges to work on. And as a computer science student, obviously I was drawn to that. And so, yeah, it happened to be Bitcoin. It like hit a lot of, like things in my mind and my heart. And I was very nerd sniped. And also I felt like I was doing something, I found something that was good for the world and all those things. So that those are all lined up. I grew up in Silicon Valley. So I think that gave me a perspective on like how endless it is to like kind of chase this idea of like innovation and like profit and stuff, and that kind of always struck pretty empty to me. So Bitcoin was very different, and I think I had an immediate kind of draw to it.
So kind of the understanding the symphony of the incentive structure of Bitcoin, that's what really magnetized you and drew you right to it. It seems like that's like, it's such a pure signal when you understand that like you said, the rational economics of every actor in this one particular thing is going to do what they think is best for themselves, which is sort of like put on your own life vest first, right? Put your oxygen mask on first. And if people do that, then they do what's best for them. It's also best for the network because the network was designed towards that psychological component, which is sort of left out of other economic endeavors. And a lot of economics people just look at things like this it's just this really smooth graph and all this other stuff. But I think Bitcoiners really see the world for much more how it is, which is like this really dynamic, organic thing that things like pass from side to side very quickly, and people always are looking to arbitrage to do what's best for them, because that's how humans have sort of survived, right? We figured that out thousands of years ago.
Yeah, and thinking about security, I think, like I said, it's very good to think about, like, I'm not saying it's a good thing that people are greedy or like, you know, will try to maximize profit, but it's good to be like, that's what we expect people to do, and that's all we rely on, and our system will operate based only on this assumption. Like, obviously, it's like, oh, I care about the environment, and then it's like, oh yeah, we'll have, you know, zero waste if everybody puts their recycling into 7 different bins or something. It's just not necessarily as rational as people want to maximize profit, and therefore it's the cheapest to recycle, or it's the cheapest to do 7 different categories, and therefore we will have, you know, a perfect green planet in X years because we've designed a system that's economically incentive compatible. And yeah, I just that's something that I appreciate about Bitcoin and how we design things.
So, yeah, Josh, your turn.
I was going to say, what is your day-to-day like? Like, is it like Zoom calls and meetings, or do you work independently, like as a decentralized, like, developer? You know, give us some sense of what goes on. Just because most people have no clue.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, people are often surprised that people work on Bitcoin. So I work on Bitcoin Core, which is one implementation of the Bitcoin client, or a Bitcoin client. So, you know, it follows the peer-to-peer protocol. It can connect to the network and follow consensus. It has mempool. It has a wallet. It has a GUI so that, you know, any user who is not super technical would be able to run it like any app on their computer. It just so happens that Bitcoin Core is about like 98% of the network. And so people think of Bitcoin Core as working on Bitcoin. And I think we're very different from most software projects, even open source projects, in that there's just no company that's in charge of Bitcoin Core. Like there are open source software projects out there where it's like, oh, there's Foundation, or there's like Google and like other big companies that, you know, don't own the license, but
fund it.
It moves because they have entire teams dedicated to working on it, and they merge each other's pull requests and all this, and that's fine. But I'm just trying to contrast that with, in Bitcoin Core, almost no, but like I think none of the maintainers, maybe 2 of them, are funded by the same organization. A lot of the maintainers live on different continents. Just devs in general are very geographically spread out, and it's really hard to get a meeting where everyone's there. But so yeah, like day to day, I'd say save a few like community cultural like changes. It's kind of just like working on any software project, except we don't have a boss, and, you know, we just kind of, we review each other's PRs because we care about them and they're important for Bitcoin, and we fix bugs because if they stay in the client, then the network might have some troubles, like not because our boss told us to, you know, so there's a bit of like, in terms of drive and direction. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. So a lot of similarities with most software engineers, but some key differences.
So my question following up with that is, what's the percentage of time that you spend, like, let's say, reviewing other people's work and having conversations with other people about what you guys are working on versus like just going in the rabbit hole yourself and doing more of a deep dive and then coming up with nuggets from there?
Right. I actually do a pretty detailed breakdown of like how I spend my time, because no one is managing me, so I have to manage myself. I spend about 30% of my time on like my main project, Package Relay, which includes coding and like writing the BIPs or like talking to people about it. And then I try to do about 50% of my time on just PR review, and or like opening small PRs to fix bugs or something. But it's like at the end of the day, we work for Bitcoin. So like it's about, you know, making sure important bug fixes get merged, and like learning more about the code base so that we can be better informed about how to maintain it. And yeah, I spend about 10% of my time on things like advocacy and education. So like I run the Bitcoin Core PR Review Club. Sometimes I write blog articles, or I'll make a set of notes about something that I dove into so that I could review a PR, or like, you know, going on a podcast or something. And then about 10% just like pure learning. So like reading C++ books, or like, I think I spent like a whole day learning tmux vim so I could like have a better setup, ricing as they call. And yeah, so like 50% review, 30% my project, and then 10% advocacy, 10% learning. I think people are often surprised to hear how, like, what percentage of my time I just spend on like going to basically podcast, conferences, notes, like that kind of stuff. I group under advocacy. And they're like, oh, so you're just like, you know, going to Miami to like have drinks and like, you know, but I very much value time like this where you're able to like send a message, and, you know, people like you will very kindly give me a platform on which I can tell people like, hey, there's people working on Bitcoin. Hey, it's going to break if, you know, nobody works on it. And so it's really important to pay the people who do, and get more people to, you know, want to be Bitcoin Core developers, because that's very important for Bitcoin's health developmentally, and just the network moving forward. So that's my time breakdown.
Where would someone start, like if they wanted to dive into, like, learn to code, right? Besides like the obvious like path that you took, sort of like with the CS degree. Let's say they're more of like a casual person looking to like dive in. How would, like, what's a good way to go about
that? So like, I guess if you already know C++ or you already can read some code, I would recommend just like fork the repo, clone it, like try running it, and you'll be absolutely amazed by how amazingly nice the build system is. But I mean, if you don't know a lot of code, I think the OpTech newsletter is a really great place to start. It basically breaks down all of the technical conversations that have been going on in the mailing list. It has topics pages for introductions to, like, you know, covenants or adapter signatures or PTLCs, you know, stuff like that, that most people need a bit of background, including developers. And then there's a lot of like educational materials out there, like Mastering Bitcoin is very accessible for people who are not as technical, but, you know, are paying attention to what they're reading. It takes work. But yeah, there's a lot of places to start. And I mean, yeah, like when you say like, I definitely feel lucky, and I had a kind of a fast track doing a computer science degree, but like in 2012, I didn't know how to code. I had never compiled anything before, really. In 2016, I had taken one Java class, you know, and so now it's been like 6 years. So, you know, given 6 years, you can go from 0 to whatever you would call this.
0 to Gloria in 6 years.
Yeah,
I think for a lot of people too, is just like learning the languages, not like literal like C++, but like what a PR even means, and like what GitHub even is, right? Like people need to like start like to dive into that sort of thing. Even outside of Bitcoin, you know, every code base or whatever, you become a better informed individual in the community, and you understand things, why they are the way they are, you know?
Yeah, and even if you're not a Bitcoiner, I think kind of cybersecurity and learning your way around your computer and maybe a terminal, maybe like being able to look up source code, verifying binaries that you download from the internet, like their GPG signatures. Like these are all kind of, I treat kind of as like self-defense, because we live our lives online and there's a lot at stake and a lot to lose if, you know, you're the victim of a phishing attack, or, you know, you download a Bitcoin client from bitcoincur.org, for example. You know, there's a lot to lose. So I think everyone should learn how to code a little bit, or, you know, equip themselves with tools to protect themselves on the internet.
Well, yeah, that's part of the social evolution that we've seen over the last, let's call it 15 years, right? I mean, we have Wi-Fi routers in our house, we have Bluetooth devices in our car and on our phone. So it's like, you know, should your airdrop be discoverable on your phone? No, right? You should have permission only. There's lots of like these little like best practices that people have sort of started to get in there. A couple years ago, there was this really popularized hack where somebody either within Apple or within like the at Mac or at me database had like ripped all these celebrity emails open and was taking a bunch of their like photos and personal information and stuff like that and publishing it. So I think that was one of the first like really public like internet security scandals that hit a massive company. And since then, there's been like Target, Equifax, all these other things where there's information is getting out there. So the more you can do to control your information and make it just so that you're difficult to pierce, that's like a huge key, like you're saying. And I think that's like from a practice standpoint, just like you wouldn't walk around with your bank balance on your t-shirt, you know what I mean? Unless you maybe are like, that's how you identify in a weird way, and I don't know, which is really a bad OPSEC thing. Like Josh was saying, there's a lot of terminology that you need to incorporate in order to learn how to do these things, which are sort of like, we all know this now, that you're supposed to change cases and your passwords and add a number or substitute characters and things like that. So I think it's just going to keep evolving, but people sometimes need a little bit of pain before they can learn how that works, right? Sometimes someone has to steal your wallet before you realize, hey, I probably shouldn't carry so much money in my wallet, right? That's sad, but that's the reality.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to another thing that I really like about Bitcoin. And like, as you mentioned, all these like huge companies that have many billions of dollars at their disposal, like pretty much when they digitized and, you know, even new companies that build software, they'll build for the happy case. And most software engineers who work for any company will be like, yeah, this shit's so brittle, like it'll fall apart if like, you know, anything goes wrong. If the user has a name that's too long, then like the app will crash, you know? And that's kind of put the onus on consumers to be vigilant and protect themselves. Whereas I like to think that Bitcoin builds kind of step by step from the bottom up, instead of just like building this huge brittle tower that's about to fall down. Is like every layer is like, security is our utmost priority, and we have to make sure this is like airtight, and like any idiot user who not idiot, I mean like any non-technical
any rookie
person,
user
yeah, rookie, like should be able to use like this client. And there are, you know, we try to get rid of foot guns. We tried to provide as much like foolproof stuff in there as possible. Okay, maybe this isn't like completely unique to Bitcoin, but it is something that I really, really appreciate, is like how high up on the priority list every security possible like thing is. Like we'll talk about like disk filling attacks because your node is logging too much, or like fingerprinting attacks based on like how you indexed your blocks. Like just like the bar is very high which I appreciate. And we don't like move fast and break things, or move fast and make things that are already broken.
I think of the core
yeah.
devs. The core devs is like the Ents from LOTR.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, they know there might be something going on, but they're slow and ultra methodical, and like come to a consensus and then take action. So yeah, I think
That's
the entire community appreciates you guys for that.
That's a great reference. I love that reference because it says like you can't say anything fast in Entish or whatever, right? But along those lines, though, as someone who puts a decent percentage of their monthly salary into Bitcoin, right? I feel good knowing that the security layer is really the building block, right? As opposed to the transaction speed or some other flashy thing that people try to sell with these other altcoins.
Exactly.
And we've seen it this year that there's been other altcoins, Solana, that have failed and bricked multiple times, because either they just have too many waiting transactions, or like you said, someone's transaction is too complicated or something like that. So I guess the transition from that is, Bitcoin existed as a sort of as a security first, stability first, predictability, kind of like concrete block. And a lot of these other altcoins are like, hey, we need to be faster, we need to be doing all this other stuff. So is it just a core flaw in proof of stake mechanisms in general to say that they can never be as secure as a proof of work chain? Or is it like to say that if you applied the security protocol high enough that you could actually get a proof of stake chain all the way up there? I mean, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, so I'm just more from a developer programming standpoint. Like I would rely on your answer on that one.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's actually a pet peeve of mine when people say like proof of work is more secure than proof of stake. I think that's kind of maybe that's not the right way to look at security. I think it's about the security model. So whenever you talk about security, you say, here's the threat model. This is what the specific attack that we're trying to defend against. And Bitcoin's value proposition is its security model, and that it's saying we want people to make payments regardless of state level censorship, regardless of what country they live in. They should always, like, it should be a permissionless system where it's censorship resistant and it still works. And there can be attacks. Like, we want the peer-to-peer network to be such that we have no idea who we're connected to, bad guy or good guy, and everyone should be able to make a payment. And all we care about is people are being economically rational and the system operates. Whereas, other security models, have more assumptions, where they're like, okay, we assume that because all of the validators registered with, the foundation, we have their real world identities, and thus we can rely on that assumption when we're thinking about security, because, okay, we always have the ability to just ban them or, shut down or slash or whatever. And so I think it's about like what security model you're thinking of. And I think what Bitcoin is trying to be is operate in the security model, and like nobody else really tries to do that. And that is its value proposition. So then if we're like, oh crap, like we need to scale to 10,000 payments per second, let's just like make sure we get everyone's identity before they join the network, then we've like lost our main value. Which is being a censorship-resistant payment network. And to be frank, it doesn't yet work to the scale where we could onboard every single person on the in the world onto it. But it does work. It does offer a solution to people who are political activists or refugees, or they're being economically sanctioned, or they're journalists being censored, or they're sex workers who are being financially frozen. Like we care about operating in this system because there are legitimately people who like need money in these systems, right? And like other, like you mentioned a few altcoins where they're not operating under that like threat model. and maybe they're doing like something, maybe they're solving an interesting technical challenge that is useful in other aspects, but they don't have what I think is Bitcoin's core value proposition, which is its security model. And so, yeah, when I just wanted, sorry to criticize you when you said more secure, but that's what I want to make very clear.
Right, but going off that though, like you said, it's like it's different when someone like me, who is not a developer, right? Like I have a cursory understanding of why things are the way they are, but like you said, if Bitcoin's built to survive the harshest economic climates, that in itself is its own use case, which is really clear, and people can get behind that and explain that. And then looking at these other things that maybe are more fragile or brittle or whatever, because they're like in that same security environment, right? Or that high tension or high risk or whatever. Whereas Bitcoin's built to survive, like, let's say, many more attacks from many more directions, and that's sort of the initial part of it. And other people are saying like, oh well, there's not really that many attacks, we don't really need that many attacks, so we're just going to do it this way, which is like a choice, right? Because it's to say, oh, if we want to operate faster, then you don't need as many nodes verifying a transaction or something like that. I think the thing that people like me really have an issue with, or take issue with the other altcoins out there, is that they sort of encourage, like, I would say, the strong to stay the strongest, and not necessarily everybody to share the burden of participation, right? So when I think of a node in Bitcoin, I think of something like you said, a Raspberry Pi running Umbrel, like very basic, very inexpensive setup that like you can buy off the internet, assemble it yourself, plug it in, it just kind of goes. Versus like, oh, I need to stake this much, otherwise I don't even get a vote, right? And like, then how do you get that big of a stack, which is maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then how do you? So it's almost like that's already what we have. Our current system economically at the fiat rails is like big banks get to decide everything. They get to lean on the politicians and tell them what to do. They say, hey, vote this way. Hey, write this bill, whatever. So I think that's in that sense, the personal aspect of it, my personal aspect of it is I would rather have non-state money with no state influence or whatever, and say that, hey, everybody has equal influence, or anybody can run a node, or everybody has equal permissions like Bitcoin, versus like, oh, hey, we're just going to reorg your whole transaction history because we don't like you, because that's weaponizable, and we see that all over the world with lots of people, like you said, debanked, demonetized property, things like that. And we wouldn't be getting the truth about what's happening in China or Hong Kong or Yemen or any of these other places if we didn't have people willing to take that risk to tell us what's really going on. And without Bitcoin going to them, it's a very bleak sort of Orwellian situation. So we could say, actually, this is a good way to put it. Bitcoin can survive the most diabolical Orwellian circumstances, so far. That's what we've come up with.
Right. Well, it's intended to.
Yeah.
It's intended to operate. There's bugs that are okay because they're not exploited, and we need to fix them. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, for sure. So, and like, I want to stay on the transactional method, or the transactional sort of notion of Bitcoin. I have on my other computer right now, on my other screen, I have mempool.space up, which is a great visualizer as a tool for people to see, like, hey, these are the transactions as they're going through live. This is how many people want to get in. Like, tell me exactly how you view the mempool as a unique characteristic of Bitcoin, and why it's like a good teaching tool. Because I pull it up when I show it, like, try to orange pill people, and people are blown away. But as a dev, how does the mempool and the mentality behind the mempool, and people being in a rush for certain transactions, how does that factor in the sort of the bugs or whatever we have?
Yeah, I think. Thank you for asking that, because I spend most of my time in the code base in the mempool area, because I find it to be where ideological values that we've just talked about meet technical challenges. So our idea is anyone should be able to pay anyone, and as the mempool space visualizer shows you, It should just be a fair fee-based market. It should not rely on you having a special relationship with miners or broadcasting from a special place in the world, or, you know, all that kind of stuff. But then, like, that's kind of, it's a very like dangerous place to be, because basically you're connecting your node to the network, and you're saying, I have no idea who my peers are. They could all be trying to attack me. They could all be the same person, hopefully not. And I'm allowing them to send arbitrary data to me. And this data is different from blocks, because when we download blocks, the first thing we do is download the 80-byte header, and we check the proof of work. And if there's no proof of work, which, as we all know, is very expensive to create, then we throw it away. If it's a transaction, on the other hand, it can be many bytes. A consensus valid transaction can be several megabytes, or maybe it can be very big, right? And it's very cheap to create, and we have to spend CPU to validate it. And so we have to be very secure against denial of service attacks, against CPU exhaustion, and you know, them trying to cause us to have an out of memory error, or cause us to crash, or cause us to stall for like half a second, which would be very meaningful as a miner to get a head start on the next block if they could get the whole network to stop for just a second, right? Or they could get us to try to ignore transactions from an honest peer. So that would be a censorship vector in transaction relay, right? And so it's very interesting, because it turns out that building something censorship resistant and permissionless is kind of hard, actually. And looking at all of the interesting engineering trade-offs is fascinating. And just like, even, okay, I didn't build the mempool. There, a lot of it is built by other people who like are really clever and have managed to like discover very scary, like, just in case an attacker sends us something like this, we need to be prepared for it, you know, kind of things. But even just from like a fee assessment standpoint, it's very interesting, because, you know, as you know, transactions have a UTXO based structure. You have an input that refers to a previous transaction, and you have outputs, and then other transactions from your outputs. So what you can end up with is like this whole graph or I guess a whole family of transactions that all rely on each other. And then how do you pick from, you know, several, like 100,000 transactions, which can be maybe, yeah, in your mempool, maybe you have 100,000 transactions. You know, they all have fees and sizes, and like, how do you pick which ones to keep in your mempool? How do you pick which ones to put in your block? If you have two conflicting transactions, how do you pick which one to keep? Like, even just from like a graph theory standpoint, or like a knapsack problem enthusiast, like, as you know, most computer science students would be like, oh, that's interesting. You know, that would be a fun programming assignment. Like, if I were to teach a computer science like algorithms course, I would be like, hey, like, how would you build a block? Or like, how would you, you know, assess the incentive compatibility of this set of 100,000 transactions that have dependencies on each other? And how do you do this in a way where if attackers are sending you these transactions, you're not gonna like stall, like just spinning in circles, like trying to figure out what to keep and what to evict. Anyway, I just went on this huge ramble. There's so many interesting things to look at in mempool, and I think like, to me, it's very easy to have very strong conviction in like, no, we cannot just like increase the cost to run a node, because not everyone has access to a 64 gig RAM computer. You know, like, it's very like, I care about the things, and it's, to me, it's easy to justify why we put ourselves through the torture of going through these trade-offs, because we're trying to build something different.
Yeah, because when you talk to people, they're like, "Oh, Bitcoin's so slow. It's 10 minutes per block. This chain could do this much in 2 seconds, right?" But no one seems to care about the actual infrastructure of the network until something goes wrong, right? If Euro goes down, you lose 25% of the nodes on Ethereum or whatever. Stuff like that happens all the time, and people just like, whatever, right? Like, I understand blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin and whatever is different things to different people. It's Bitcoin, or it's banking, it's payments, and it's investing. For some people, it's purely just like casino, right? Like, they could care less
Right.
if it's centralized, or if it goes down every other month like Solana. Like, a lot of people just don't care. They're here for JPEGs and a good time. But then there's the other people who are trying to focus on like actual security problems, like we've been discussing. So it's like, it's hard to steer people towards the stuff that matters, because they're so busy with these like flashy things, these beeping lights, and the veneer of this network that isn't Bitcoin that's somehow better, right?
Yeah, like when I think about why devs work on other projects, like almost every person that I went to college with, like most of them work on a blockchain, like altcoin, or okay, not most of them, but like a fair number of them. And like, I think it's because as an engineer, you want to build, like often you want to build greenfield, or you want to build something cool, or you want to build something nice, or you want to work with people who build nice things, or you can learn from. And I would say that Bitcoin Core kind of is less attractive in that aspect. Like you can't build everything from scratch and just like merge 10,000 lines of code, and like, because it's cool. But like, I don't think that we necessarily have to live with that in Bitcoin. But like, as of like the way Bitcoin Core kind of stands today is because it's so much of the network, like a lot of people rely on it to be their like everyday node usage. And also people treat it as a consensus library, where it's like, we cannot touch this. Like, like if we screw this up, then the network crashes, which is fair. Like, hopefully I've made it very clear that I think, it's very important to be conservative in making invasive changes. But like right now, there's so much of Bitcoin Core that is not consensus critical, it's not protocol critical, but because people rely on it as their everyday node, and we don't have just like a minimal, sorry, I'm going to show libbitcoin kernel, which is a project that Carl Dong is working on, to just strip away into one library the consensus protocol, like necessary to stay in sync with the network pieces of code, away from the, how many buttons do we have in the GUI, and what are all the options that you can configure your wallet to do. Hopefully that's quite clear, like which part is necessary for Bitcoin Core consensus library, and which one is like more, okay, maybe some people want this in their node and some people don't. And so, yeah, I think kind of having to do both things, be everyone's node and maintain a consensus library, kind of probably makes Bitcoin Core a little bit less attractive to engineers who want to build cool shit and solve interesting problems and like, do probably the things that they get to do when they go and see the sexy altcoin implementations.
Yeah. Well,
so,
like the
sorry.
thing, no, it's okay. So picking up on that a little bit, there's a distinction, like you said, where people want to work on things and they want to be able to stamp their like work on it to say, hey, I did this. This thing's me. That's my BIP or whatever, right? So in a sense that like the security model and the security mindset is really more of a teamwork thing than it is a diva thing, right? Because you can't be like a security diva. You have to be you have to be sort of selfless to kind of put things out there, to work with other people, to come up with a security model that is decentralized, that does work. Whereas I think some of these other programs, it could be somebody making an iPhone game or something like that. Because like, you know, if you're building something, you're building something. It doesn't really matter what direction you're building. It's like you feel good that you're doing something, right? But some people need that recognition, they need that spotlight, and you can't get that spotlight in Bitcoin as easily because there's just so many more, you know, there's just so many people that are kind of like doing so many things at the same time. Whereas like you could be the lead developer on a brand new altcoin that doesn't exist yet, and then you can be like the superhero, the face, or whatever. And I think some people are not immune to that. You know, I was a professional athlete, and it was always like somebody would get a hit and win the game, and people will be like, damn it, I wish I got the hit to win the game. And it's like, the team just won the game, shut up, you know?
Yeah.
But I think that those people are attracted a lot more to the altcoin space because it is much more instant gratification that you could, you know, merge an ERC20 token of your own and just shoot it and then just put it out there, right? It's just a lot easier to do that. Whereas Bitcoin, you can't. If you if you're like, hey, I'm going to fork Bitcoin, I'm going to have my own Bitcoin fork, people will be like, yeah, I don't know about that. It's a lot less likely to get positive reception, I think, because of the history of Bitcoin and Bitcoin forks and stuff like that.
Sure. I don't, yeah, I agree. Like you don't get as much like, it's not as easy to make a big significant change in a project that is so big and old and conservative. But I don't think we necessarily have to settle for, you know, okay. So if you look at changes to a Bitcoin client like Bitcoin Core, you can think of it maybe on like two spectrums. One is utility, like how much can you improve the way this node operates with this change, and then the other one is like how dangerous is it to introduce this, like how many, aka like how bad is it if you fuck this up, like how many people do you need to get on board in order to make this change. Hopefully those are on the same spectrum, right? And like not every change to Bitcoin Core is in the same place, right? It's all in like different areas of the spectrum. A consensus change is like high on both scales, right? It can be extremely high utility, not necessarily, but it can be like SegWit, like completely changed. It gave us Lightning, right? It changed Bitcoin in many ways. So it's high on both. And then something that's high utility but has very little impact, very little risk, is maybe writing tests and documentation. And like you can have something that's very, very like invasive but has very little utility, like some, you know, protocol change proposals that people might put out there. And like, I think right now we're kind of hamstrung in that most things are treated as it's extremely dangerous to introduce to Bitcoin Core because we don't have a clear separation of like what is necessary to be this like pristine consensus library that everybody uses and what is just like just going to be great for the user. Like if we had a wallet change, for example, that would save users 10% on fees every single time. Over the course of them using this wallet, they always save 10% on fees. Like theoretically, that should have no impact whatsoever on whether or not their node is running properly, right? It's a wallet, like you're creating a transaction, you're giving it to the node, right? But you know, in several years ago, the wallet, the GUI, the consensus code, all of it was like in one file even. And in that case, you have no choice because you have no idea whether your wallet changes, you change something here and something breaks over there. But like, we don't have to settle for that, right? And maybe this is me just like talking too much about like the nitty gritty, like development kind of thing. But I do kind of want to put this out there for people who are listening or watching, that, you know, like software has costs. Like software maintenance is a full-time job for many people, and the Bitcoin Core code base is very big and has dependencies, and like we fix bugs every day. There's like 130 issues open that are labeled bug. There are dozens of PRs open labeled bug fix. And like we talked today so much about how much Bitcoin stresses security. And I think part of that is like we need to figure out how to separate what's extremely security critical from like what's, you know, not. And yeah.
So help me if can I put this in layman's terms? Basically what you're saying is the transaction model is like the kernel, right? That doesn't get changed, but then the sort of, let's say, functionality of more elegant or more complicated types of transactions is sort of up for, some people don't need that, some people want that. Some people want to be able to have these like crazy multi-sig decay transactions with Taproot or Taro or whatever, where they can say, oh, after 3 years, it's going to be 5 of 7. Then after 5 years, it's going to be 2 of 3 or something. Like that stuff's not necessarily necessary for someone that wants to send 52,000 sats today, right now. And so that's where you sort of have these two different things. And if you try to merge the super complicated into the simple, then you end up getting like a little bit of a fruit salad with priorities, right?
Right. Not to point fingers at any specific proposal, I just hope that people understand that there's multiple dimensions. There's the utility and there's the risk you introduce to the network when you try to attempt a consensus change, for example, versus something that's non-consensus or it does not require protocol change. And try to think about both. And also note that right now, because of the way that Bitcoin Core is treated, most things are much higher on the scale of danger than they need to be.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's fascinating for me because I feel like as someone who's not directly involved in it but hears a lot about it, I think of that thing which is like it's the risk benefit analysis, right? Which is how high does the utility have to be before you're willing to take the risk from 0 to 1, you know? And you know, it's like, does it need to be 3 utility steps higher to be 1 more riskier, you know? Or and because as we get more users on Bitcoin and we go from millions to millions to millions to millions to whatever to hundreds of millions and more hundreds of millions, it's like, how are we going to distribute the nodes? How are we going to distribute the transactions? How are we going to distribute the block size? And like you said, the prioritization. And then can Lightning fix those things? Or can Lightning continue to scale like it is now? We have over 4,000 Bitcoin locked in Lightning for liquidity. Like at what point, how many Bitcoin will there have to be on level 2 before you can build something on top of level 2 to like make a level 3 or something like that, you know? And that to me is like this really fascinating cloud that we can't really see through yet because it's so many people are determined to like, you know, steer it. And it's like, it's going to take a really big group of smart people fighting about it to sort of have the one thing come forward, right?
Yeah. The answer, I think, is you build layers, just like the traditional financial system is built in layers. Nobody's shipping gold bars back and forth. Like you're getting a credit card and you're settling with Visa at the end of the month. Merchants are setting up payment terminals and settling at the end of the month. Like not like Visa doing 10,000 transactions per second is not like comparable. And all software is built in layers. Like we rely, I mean, Bitcoin is built on top of TCP/IP. Like, you know.
Well, every app, yeah, people just see the interface. They just see the end GUI or the UX or whatever of like Uber. But Uber is like a GPS satellite for you, a GPS satellite for your driver, your bank account, your credit card, their bank account, their credit card, Uber, TCP/IP. Like so it's like really like a 6-layer, 7-layer beam dip, you know, with all these different things that have to interact. And that's what I tell everybody how early we are with Bitcoin, that we're really only just scratching the surface of layer 2 in a lot of ways. You know, with Lightning and Liquid and stuff like that to be out there to do these other things. And I think it's going to attract more people to it once they realize that because Bitcoin has a very antagonistic security model at its core. You can lump, it's like having a really good bone structure. You can lump all these other limbs and muscles and tails and all this other stuff onto it, and come up with crazy ideas for how to do Lightning transactions. Like there's a lot of different interesting things out there, but people, I don't know, I think like there's just a not a mass understanding change, but there's a like a step change that you need to make as a person, as a non-coding person, to like take the time to just like surround yourself with these things a little bit and listen to it, and then you're like, wow, we really need these core devs because they're actually protecting my financial future like 50 years from now with decisions they make today. That's kind of cool. I think that's like the message I think that we should share with people, is that people like yourself, you're working for our kids to have a good financial structure to build on.
No pressure, by the way.
No pressure. But all the respect, all the respect to you for doing that, because like it's a very indirect way of securing things for most people. Most people still aren't even using Bitcoin yet. So that we're doing something, we're laying the groundwork and putting the train tracks in so you guys can so things can sail through smoothly whenever these people figure out how to be Bitcoiners.
Yeah, and sorry, we're not going to build it quickly because we're not trying to build brittle software systems that, you and I are so used to. It's going to be built brick by brick where everything is stable underneath. So we need more people and more time.
Definitely. And Gloria, thank you for coming on. I think we could talk to you for another 3 hours, but I think we have to leave it there.
Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure.
And I'll let CJ sign us off here.
All right. So I don't think we gave any financial advice on this one, but I'm going to go ahead and say it wasn't financial advice. What would be great, though, Gloria, if you could give our listeners, give us some resources, some websites to check out, some places to read. If someone's interested in learning how to code, so maybe some steps, things like that, if you have any resources to shill.
Yeah, I would recommend bitcoinops.org, which is Bitcoin OpTech. Subscribe to that newsletter and you'll always be up to date on what's happening in the development community. I would also recommend, if you are a dev, clone the Bitcoin core repo at github.com/bitcoin/Bitcoin. If you are not that technical, but willing to run your own node, go to bitcoincore.org. And if you are already looking at Bitcoin Core and unsure how to contribute, please come to bitcoincore.reviews. Come to our weekly PR review club, where we talk about how to look at code changes and the code base with a security mindset. And we give you tours through how certain functionalities work inside the code. So come and don't trust, verify.
That's perfect. I love it. Well, Gloria, thank you for being our guest on the Bitcoin Bottom Line. I'm CJ Wilson, and we are signing out.